I'm Edie Lush, Executive Editor at Hub Culture, and we are delighted to be here today. Outside, it's a little bit colder.
It's a little bit cold.
James Kanagasooriam, how are you today?
I'm fantastic, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah. Chief Research Officer at Focaldata. Now, you do research with people all over the world about some of the most important topics. I want to talk first of all about the New World Order. We're seeing a world in which the old poles are shifting. We haven't quite got to where the next poles are going to be, but tell me a little bit about what you're hearing from the people you're speaking to.
Well, yeah, it's a big and great question. It's basically the dominating theme of this Davos. My job is to not necessarily listen to politicians or business leaders, but to actually listen to normal people and then transmit those findings to them. And look, we're in a transition phase. Everyone kind of knows that. A level of volatility, uncertainty, and transition. Most people know that the kind of pre-existing kind of post-war architecture, whether that's the kind of aspects of the UN, the WHO, all these large multilateral institutions, are effectively not working or don't have the political buy-in that they once had. I mean, that's obvious. We've seen obviously the dismantling of US aid. The overseas development aid sector is obviously in a tricky place. We've seen all sorts of kind of multilateral efforts effectively go by the wayside. What's to come entirely depends on basically what the groupings are of particular countries that see themselves as not only allies in terms of values, but also from a trade perspective. And what the public are saying is they don't know. So if you were to go to Canada, for an obvious example, obviously we've seen a massive restructuring of public opinion in Canada in regards to the US. I think at the latest poll I saw, the kind of net approval rating or sense that America was an ally at minus 50%. That's obviously a massive transformation for a country. I think that has around 70% of its exports, but it's also happening in Europe. We're seeing that the major European countries like France, Germany, UK, Spain, and Italy kind of slightly rethinking what they do, who they can be with, what are the international alliances that they can do, how do those interact with political cycles. But again, Europe actually isn't one place. We might see a slightly different messaging from Italy. Obviously, there's also an Eastern grouping within NATO as well that is potentially slightly more skeptical of NATO.
Wait, let's just talk about that. Skeptical of NATO. But this is a part of the multilateral world in which Europe's defense depends on.
Yeah.
And you're seeing people within Europe now start to get more skeptical about it?
Well, I think if you, for example, have polled Bulgaria, Hungary, or let's say Serbia, actually for the last 20 years, people think very differently about the international order there than they do, for example, in France and Germany and the UK. Far more kind of stronger links in terms of public opinion towards Russia, potentially much stronger relationships with China, very, very different attitude towards multilateral institutions. It's not actually that what I would call extreme consent was ever there, actually. And actually the slight unraveling of this has revealed actually very, very different relationships and sets of public opinion across Europe. And to go to your wider question, what next? That's kind of what the leaders are here to discuss, to understand. I don't think anyone gets a prize for saying that the old order is clearly breaking down and that the new order is coming. A lot of people are being quite euphemistic. A lot of people are doing work to understand what that looks like. And again, it's all about effectively the degree of alignment between trade, between values, between pre-existing relationships, between population flows. All of these things are not perfectly aligned, and therefore it's not entirely obvious what the architecture looks like. All of this, I guess, on top of, we were at the G20 running some kind of public opinion studies. One of the things that was very common and mentioned there was the concept of the G2, which is obviously China and the US.
Right.
And a lot of people saying, where's that discussion? So again, what is effectively happening is far more attention is now effectively being paid into a very concentrated middle in terms of the polarities that exist between USA and China.
What are the things that really matters? Because there's a lot of discussion here at Davos about geoeconomic concerns, confrontation, tariffs. Do people care about that stuff?
So they frame it very differently. Like the average person on the street in Spain, in France, in the UK, in Germany, won't necessarily have a particularly sophisticated understanding of tariffs. Dare I say, a lot of people who should have an understanding don't. You know, there's a lot of Wikipediaing that's been going on in the last couple of months. But people do basically...
They care about prices.
They care about prices.
They care about what's available on
their
their
shelves. They care about inflation.
Shelves.
But also, people care about fairness. And the thing about the politics of tariffs from a public opinion perspective is, of course, once they're levered on to a particular country, people don't like the idea that things can be done unilaterally. They don't like the idea they don't have agency or they don't have control and that things are uncertain. But crucially, the concept of fairness is very important, which I think gives a bit less room for leaders to not necessarily respond to tariffs. Like the sense that if something is done to your country and therefore there's a tariff rate and therefore you're paying more for your goods and services, people would typically expect, therefore, there to be reciprocal action. And that obviously then creates this kind of doom loop, right? Effectively, where we put up tariff barriers, free trade and global trade becomes under attack, and then, you know, we still live in a very inflationary environment. So do people link everything together, like a series of geopolitical experts and economists? No, but I think everyday people are extremely intelligent. They really understand these principles at a kind of fundamental level, even if they don't know the technical stuff.
Let's talk about artificial intelligence. I think there's 48 different sessions within the Congress centers purely on AI. AI has entered into every single discussion that I've had on this terrace. I wonder what when you're polling people, what are people concerned about? Obviously, we're already seeing LLMs eat into people's jobs.
Yep.
There's still some frustration around trusting AI. We don't know whether we can trust the agents. There's a lot of regulation coming. The EU has regulation coming, California, New York. I think there's 150 different bits of regulation. Tell me what you're hearing from people about what they're concerned about. So
I guess on this, we're not conflicted, but we have we collect information on people and we try and understand what their opinions on AI. But you know, my firm Focaldata is an AI research company, so we use all this tooling to do a lot of our work.
Right.
So we're actually seeing it.
Do you think they're controlling you?
On the ground, no. Well,
not yet.
The concept of cognitive sovereignty, we can return to that.
Okay.
But that is a thing that's coming up, and has been mentioned in a couple of the panels that have been around here. So I think when it comes to AI, there's 3 or 4 things from a public opinion perspective that are important. The first is digital sovereignty. It's the idea that effectively a country is basically in control of its digital infrastructure. That is a very different conversation in the US versus Europe, where effectively a lot of the infrastructure isn't built, a lot of the data can't necessarily be processed here, the compute power isn't here, the data centers aren't here, and therefore the conversation is a lot more conflicted and a lot more about trade-offs in terms of economic growth versus the US and the China that's just trying to scale at pace. And I think there's a huge piece here that's about trade-offs, like in terms of economic growth, in terms of opportunity, versus the ceding of, let's be clear, a degree of sovereignty and control. And I think that will be a huge political issue in the coming years. So that's the first kind of bucket of things that we think is quite interesting. The second bucket of things that we think is interesting is effectively what I've just mentioned, cognitive sovereignty, which is the degree to which we think we're basically in control. Like, how much are we ceding? Like, one of the big things that we've seen is the increase in agentic technology, which is obviously the use of agents. So the AI isn't one thing, it's 20 things, they all interact with each other. Human beings effectively act as managers to the work, they interact. That has a huge effect. What are people concerned about? The first couple of things is obviously a degree of massive labour market substitution. We're already seeing that. In terms of white-collar graduate jobs, those are significantly down. But I think more importantly, a lot of people are thinking about the generation that's even before them, which is like people with kids. What are we equipping them for? Because 20 years ago, I don't know if you remember, everyone was like, right, go study STEM subjects. Science, technology, mathematics. You've got Claude Code now. No-code solutions that are effectively being able to scale at pace. I have a friend called Ben Gurin who's just set up a website in 24 hours and has had 100,000 hits. Wow. Basically, he's mapped every pub in Britain or something like that in terms of what the business tariffs are. Like, that would have been a 5-week exercise to a firm with multiple people. So I wonder about what we're preparing for. We've done some research on that, which is quite interesting. One of the things is a guy called Fleisch's topology. So it sounds technical, but it's not, which is basically what he's done is he's gone through and said, here are the 53 aspects of humanity that I can code up. Anything from like hand control and motor skills to dexterity to some kind of different cognitive task, whether that's numerical or whether that's in terms of language. For us, what's incredibly interesting there is the degree to which kind of hyper creativity is actually a bit less automatable. Obviously, at least in the UK and other places, we've been having massive battles over copyright and the aspects of AI and what's the correct thing to do. But what we can see is that jobs basically that have a degree of more creativeness to them. And by creative, I don't mean literal, the task is creative, but the actual job is creative. You're switching domains, you're being dynamic, you're being fluid, you're trying to marshal forces. And if you think about agentic technology, actually the skill of marshalling is one of the things that's
I like that, the skill of marshalling. That's a good one. Yeah. I also think that there's a huge opportunity for to use agents for learning too, right? To teach all of us, be our tutors for everything. We have an enormous amount of knowledge in the world. A lot of it still isn't digitized, but it's being digitized quite quickly. And the ability to use AI for education could be huge if somebody tapped it.
I think so, but then it creates a whole hurdle of other problems around accreditation. So of course, you've now got a surfeit of information, massive amount of information. You've got, obviously, hallucinations were a problem and were mentioned. But now the issue, I think, is around the degree to which you can have different levels of information. There's a lot of it. And what people are really looking for is trusted voices. You can actually see a bit of a flight to quality in terms of distributing information and knowledge. Yes, it can offer massive opportunities. Yes, it can lower barriers. I'm actually very interested in what AI and the technologies will do for public sector.
Talk about that.
Europe is obviously in a massive demographic crisis. So the total fertility rate is below 2, needs to be 2.1 for a population to remain the same. We're basically in line for a fairly catastrophic population fall across Europe. That's going to have a massive effect in terms of taxpayers. There's not going to be the proper ratio of people who claim funds from a state and people who are effectively able to give funds via taxes. I'm very interested in the fact that a lot of these technologies will produce massive efficiencies across the public sector potentially. We have a lot of technology companies here. That's their story. Maybe we should be skeptical, but you can already see a lot of administrative tasks, a lot of joined up systems, a lot of data systems. We've seen the Federated Data Platform in the UK, for example, from a healthcare perspective. So for me, we're right at the foothills. I think people who are saying it's an unalloyed bad or an unalloyed good, it's not kind of correct. Functionally, it can be both. It's all about what's the regulatory framework. And again, to go back to the people, because my job is to listen to people and act as a conduit from what everyday people are saying and pass that on to people who run things. I think most people get that. I think they understand that you can use these tools to get back more of your time. But for me, that's the really critical thing. I'm really interested in the time equation. I think that a lot of good will come about from time saving. But we should also be very clear there are aspects of this that are going to, that are effectively going to waste time. And I'm very, very interested in where on the time equation this ends up.
Okay, we've done a lot. Anything else you want to make sure you cover today, either on AI or anything else?
Well, there's enough theory topics.
All right, James, thank you very much for stopping by the Hub Culture
Thank you very much.
Pavilion, and I'm Edie Lush.